Okay, so we have 23 participants with us. We're going to get started. Asia, if you can start doing the welcome now.
I can go ahead. Yep. I'm sorry, am I going?
Yeah, Leonie, you can start.
Okay. So thanks everyone. Appreciate it. I see a whole bunch of folks are on. We had a whole bunch of people sign up, and we're doing a webinar function. Some of you may not be familiar with it, but you'll learn more. You can see a couple of us. You can't see yourself at this moment. My name is Leone Jose Bicchieri. I'm the Executive Director of Working Family Solidarity. I know a lot of the folks on this call. Some of you I don't. I want to thank you for getting on. I originally thought of personally thanking a number of people who got on today, and then I realized that would take all of my time. I'm just going to do a brief welcome now and close at the end, and then Benetta Standly, a longtime colleague and comrade of mine, will be leading the presentation. We started our organization several years ago with the mission to unite low and moderate income working families of different backgrounds in Chicago, especially African American and Latinx, to fight together for equitable development. Our theory, and we work mainly in the areas of jobs and housing, but in order to do that, you have to do some work on immigration, criminal justice, and civil rights. And that'll be our first teaching starting in a few minutes, will be on civil rights. We need to know where we're coming from, know where we are now and analyze, and then figure out where we're going together. And in this time where we can't do these personally, in person, like we normally would, we're doing it virtually. And so we'll be doing one today and in 3 weeks and another 3 weeks. Then we'll do a 3-part racial unity dialogue with different focus in November, December, January. You'll be hearing from us on that. At Working Family Solidarity, we have a 3-tiered approach. Know Your Rights workshops, racial unity dialogues, and then very concrete justice campaigns. I'm not going to talk much about that tonight because I'm going to be brief. But what we have in this racial justice teaching series.
Excuse me, Leonie, I'm so sorry. Can we let the interpreters set us up, and then we'll come to your welcome and introduction.
I thought I was on. Okay.
The interpretation function should be live now. Ceci, Eileen, if you can hear me in English and you can interpret in Spanish, give me a thumbs up. Okay, Leonie, please, they're going to talk for a few minutes and then you're next.
Okay. Is someone gonna?
They're saying, how can you talk now, Ceci or Eileen? Hold on. Try it again.
There. Yes, there we go.
Okay.
Sweet. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. Could we share the first few slides, please? Mi nombre es Cecilia Sainz Becerra. My name is Cecilia Sainz Becerra. I am one of the interpreters. Soy una de las intérpretes. Y mi colega Eileen.
Buenas noches.
¿Te quieres presentar? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eileen. I'm also an interpreter with you guys tonight. Buenas noches, soy Eileen. También soy intérprete con ustedes hoy. Muchas gracias por tenernos. Thank you very much for having us.
Muchas gracias. Si están accediendo el webinario a través de su computadora, por favor miren la imagen a la izquierda. Y si están accediendo el webinario por su celular, por la aplicación, miren la imagen a la derecha.
If you're accessing this webinar via your computer, please look at the image to the left. And if you're accessing the webinar via your smartphone, please see the image to the right.
Y si su primer lenguaje es, si usas primordialmente el inglés, por favor, después de que prendamos la función de interpretación, van a ver un globo abajo, como el que está en la imagen, y van a ahí poder seleccionar inglés. Y, bueno, dale, Eileen, perdón.
If you are a monolingual speaker, at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little globe that says interpretation, and there you will be able to choose your channel either in English or in Spanish.
Si hablan primordialmente en español, entonces van a escoger el español, y si son bilingües, no tienen que escoger ninguno de los lenguajes, lo pueden dejar en apagado o off para escuchar y hablar en ambos lenguajes.
If your first language is English, then you can choose Spanish. You have to choose the Spanish channel. If it's English, you can just leave it as it is.
Bilingual.
Oh, if you're bilingual, I'm sorry, you can just leave it as it is.
Once you selected your language preferences via the channel, you can leave it that way for the rest of the call. And if you have any issues with interpretation, please send a chat, and Asia or one of us will help you with that.
Una vez que ya eligieron el idioma, lo pueden dejar así por el resto del webinar, y si tienen alguna duda, algún problema, pueden mandar un mensaje en el chat dirigido a Asia o también a alguna de nosotras para responderles sus preguntas o cualquier problema que tengan.
Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. The globe, I see a message. Yes. So aquí van a ver las mismas instrucciones, pero en español.
You're going to see the same instructions here in English.
In Spanish.
I mean, in Spanish. I'm switching.
The globe is not at the bottom to address a question on the chat. The globe is going to be at the bottom once we turn on the interpretation function after this little intro. So you'll see it in a second.
El icono de interpretación no está ahorita en sus pantallas, pero va a estar disponible ya que la interpretación se haga disponible también.
Next slide. So language is not a barrier, right? We have multiple languages. When we have multiple languages in a space, we have multiple cosmovisions and multiple ways of understanding the world. So we have the opportunity to expand and deepen our perspective, our imaginations, the possible strategies, tactics, and visions for what is possible.
El lenguaje no es una barrera, al contrario, cuando tenemos varios lenguajes, tenemos la oportunidad de crear una cosmovisión y tener diferentes formas de entender el mundo. Tenemos la oportunidad de expandir y profundizar nuestras perspectivas, nuestra imaginación, las posibles estrategias, tácticas, visiones y todo lo que es posible.
So during the webinar, we ask that you please speak one person at a time. I think that's going to be totally possible given that it's panelist form. But this will help us so that we don't have to make a decision about which voice to privilege over the other.
Durante el webinar les pedimos que hablen una persona a la vez para que nosotros como intérpretes no tengamos que decidir a quién vamos a interpretar.
We also ask that you please speak loud and clear, ideally using headphones with a mic. We need to be able to hear the speaker over the sound of our own voice when doing simultaneous interpretation.
Les pedimos por favor que hablen fuerte y claramente, usen audífonos y micrófonos de preferencia. Nosotros tenemos que poder oírlos bien y con claridad para poder interpretar lo que ustedes están diciendo.
And we also ask you to please slow down. Everyone, you know, speak at a moderate pace, take a deep breath after each sentence, take a pause after switching speakers and asking questions. There is a 2 to 3 second lag, and slowing down supports everyone, not just the interpreters.
También les pedimos de favor que hablen en un paso moderado. Si hablan muy rápido no vamos a poder entender lo que están diciendo y tal vez tendremos que cortar la interpretación. Después de cada oración, respiren, tómense 1 o 2 segundos para continuar sus oraciones. Cuando hablan un poquito más despacio, nos ayuda a todos para poder interpretar para ustedes mejor.
All right, we can switch to the interpretation function and we'll do a quick test just to make sure that folks can hear.
Ceci and Elaine, can you hear me and interpret properly? Okay, well, we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce Leonie Jose Piccieri, who is the Executive Director of Working Family Solidarity.
So I jumped the gun, so I'm going to be extra brief this time. Thank you very much for attending. I saw the list of people who are on right now, and a number of people are interns with our organization, and part of their assignment is to be on the racial justice teach-ins, and later we'll see if we can keep them on for some racial unity dialogues as well. In addition, we have a couple of board members, Reverend Felicia Campbell, Matthew Robinson. I also want to give a shout out to our speaker, longtime comrade and founding board member of Working Family Solidarity, Benetta Standly. She'll be taking over in a moment. Also Adriana Avila McClintock, our communications and development person, whom I've known for like 18 years. And has been doing a great job. There's a lot of other people I could thank who are on the call, but I'm gonna leave it out because I don't have the time. I'll simply say that we formed to unite low and moderate income families of different backgrounds in Chicago, especially African Americans and Latinx. We'll be talking about that especially more in our next racial justice teach-in and dialogue on October 7th. But for today, we're gonna talk a little bit about some legal issues, laws, movements around civil rights, both involving African Americans and people of other races, and how that's all worked together, and a lot of stuff we still need to do. We're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers and comments later. Benetta will be directing all of that. I'll simply say a few words to close later. But I want to remind you that at Working Family Solidarity, our philosophy is not that we declare ourselves united, but that we understand that we are not currently very united. And we go from that reality. And so our dialogues, we hope, have a sort of a real feel. Now, we do Know Your Rights trainings, we do racial unity dialogues, and concrete justice campaigns. These 3 teach-ins are a little more towards the Know Your Rights in terms of reminding ourselves of important historical moments, laws, legislation, and so on, with some dialogue, comments, questions. For a while, some of us will stay on past 7:30 once we formally end, in case some of you want to continue the dialogue. And then in the near future, we'll be working in racial unity dialogues, which will have less presentation and more discussion. So we believe in doing both the Know Your Rights, Know Your History, Know Your Laws now, and then dialogue to build unity, and then figure out together where we're going. So that's why this is a series. I'll close by saying that we think it's through honesty and realizing that we have more in common than we have things that divide us. But for African Americans and Latinx here in Chicago's poor neighborhoods, and for other races as well, we often see each other as competition for scarce resources. And that's not our fault. because sometimes we are put in positions where we have to compete for jobs, for housing, and for everything else. And so we end up getting angry with each other and fighting each other while someone else laughs all the way to the bank. And so we're about building that unity, not based on declaring that race doesn't matter, but sadly admitting that the powers that be have really made it matter. And it's up to us to disentangle that whole racialization of our society and get back to working together for the good of all of us. But we can't do that until we really extinguish racism. So we got to work together, hold each other accountable, and try to get somewhere together. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll say a few words at the end. We'll have some more dialogue. And again, some of us will stay on for a little longer for those of you who wish to after 7:30. And back to my colleague and comrade, Benetta, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Leonie. I am really excited to be here with you all tonight. My name is Benetta Standly, and I am excited to talk to you a little bit about civil rights. And I'm going to highlight some cases that involve regular folks like you and me who really made a difference in this country and got some laws changed and expanded our protections. So I'm going to share my screen now and pull up a PowerPoint presentation. One second. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the term civil rights, and to make sure we all have a pretty good grasp of what that term means. And civil rights are simply the rights that are guaranteed to us here in the United States that require that people be treated equally under the law. So it requires equal social opportunities and protections for all of us, regardless of race, religion, or other personal characteristics. As we know, these rights have been taken away from us at various points throughout history for various groups, particularly groups of color and poor folks. Some of the ways in which, some of the rights in which we've had in this country or that we fought really hard to get include things like the right to vote, the right to a fair trial, the right to government services, the right to public education, the right to use public facilities. So civil rights are really an essential component of democracy in this country. And so when individuals are denied those rights in our political society, then we start seeing inequality and unfairness. So I just want to talk about historically how some of these civil rights violations have occurred. It's occurred in the denial of the right to vote, right? It's occurred in the denial of access to public education in schools. It's occurred in the confinement of groups of people based on their race or national origin. It's occurred in the denial of access to public accommodations like buses, trains, bus stations, water fountains, and any other public spaces. And it's also occurred in the removal of land, removal of people from their land based on their race. This typically happens in two ways. There's a phrase called de facto segregation, which is where groups are kept separate based on customs and traditions and housing patterns. And then there's also segregation, which happens when you're lawfully discriminated against in housing, jobs, and other kinds of scenarios. So I want to go over a couple examples of discrimination based on race or national origin. One example would be the violation of the civil rights which happened during World War II of Japanese Americans in this country. At the time, President Roosevelt forced many Japanese Americans into internment camps after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And so this forced interrogation basically made it possible for people who are Japanese ancestry to be relocated out of their homes into confinement for a period of time. Another example of a violation of civil rights would be the law often called separate and not equal. So right after African Americans were freed during the Reconstruction period, after the Civil War, a bunch of different laws were passed, right? Slavery was abolished. People were given due process, and then all men in the country were allowed to vote. But those rights, although they were separate, they still were far from equal. Another example of this would be the Plessy v. Ferguson case, which took place in 1896. It's when the highest court in our land, which was the Supreme Court, basically legalized segregation across the country. Further example of that is separate and not equal was the discrimination. And discrimination is essentially unfair treatment of a group of people. And this was very common in the United States. So you see the image talks about a white water fountain versus a colored water fountain. This is how groups of people were treated very separately. Another example of separate and not equal is segregation, where there was a social separation of people based on their race. And so you see the colored waiting room sign. And specifically in the South, where I'm located, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, there was a whole new set of laws that were sort of informal laws, but they were called the Jim Crow laws that further separated people by race. So I want to talk a little bit about some cases, some laws, some court cases involving not only African Americans, but people of Latinx descent as well across the country. So the first case I would like to share from my hometown of Los Angeles is the ZuZu Riots. So this is really considered the worst riots that happened in the country. And for 10 nights, American soldiers sort of went through Mexican American neighborhoods and basically pulled out guys they thought were zoot suiters who had on these suits, which were really, quite frankly, the zoot suiters are cool, but they were just some young Mexican American teens who wore baggy pants and long tail coats. And these soldiers literally dragged them, and most of them were kids as young as 12 years old, out of movie theaters, cafes. They tore off their clothes and they beat them. Another example of civil rights was in 1944, Senator Dennis Chavez of New Mexico, he introduced the Fair Employment and Practices Bill. And this bill would prohibit discrimination based on race, creed, and national origin. And this is really important because this bill laid the foundation for the 1964 Civil Rights Act 20 years later. Another case is, and actually yesterday, did anyone see the Google Doodle? If you did, it was about Felicitas. I can't say the name, Leonie, help me. You're muted.
Felicitas.
Thank you. Mendes. And so the Google Doodle yesterday was about Miss Mendes versus Westminster, which is a town in Orange County, California, where she said that if you discriminate against students of Mexican American students by saying they can't go to school with white children. It violates their constitutional rights. And so this case, again, this was in 1945. This case was, and she won that case, was very important because it led to the victory in almost 10 years later in the Brown v. Board of Education case. In 1948, at the time, President Truman said finally that African Americans can join the military. And then in 1954, there was another case called the Hernandez v. Texas case, which was after World War II, or basically struck down discrimination based on class and ethnic distinctions. And I just want to say that all of these cases involve the Latinx community and were generally 10 to 20 more years before the African Americans started winning their civil rights cases. So we learned a lot from your community and the work that they did to advance civil rights. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about young brother Emmett Till, particularly because a lot of the young folks who are joining us tonight need to know that he's from Chicago and he was 14 years old. And Emmett Till was from Chicago, but he was visiting family like all Black folks do. We send our kids home to the South for the summer. And he was beaten and shot in the head because supposedly he flirted with a white woman. And so he was so grotesquely beaten that his face was unrecognizable. And his mother, Miss Mamie Till, decided that she needed to show the world how they brutalized her son. And she said, I'm going to have an open casket funeral. I'm going to allow the reporters in, and I need you guys to take pictures and show the world how they killed my son. As you know, there's lots of bias in the judicial system, and the jury selected in this case against the assailants were all white, and within an hour, they found all the white defendants not guilty. In 1951, there was a young woman named Linda Brown, and she wanted to go to the school closest to her house, which happened to be a white school. And they did not allow African Americans to attend that school. The school they wanted to send her to was very far from her house. So her parents decided to sue the Board of Education to try to force them to allow Linda to go to her school. And this is Linda Brown from the Brown v. Board of Education case. And so this is the case that was ruled by the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., the highest court in the land, that said separate education is inherently unequal, and it ended school desegregation across the United States. And so that came to pass because Linda Brown and her parents, and some really fabulous attorneys with the NAACP. But that's Linda. She was a real young woman who went through lots of struggles during that lawsuit in integrating her school. But I wanted to just mention a couple major moments that happened in the civil rights movement across the United States and certainly in the South. In 1961, you had the Freedom Riders, who were young folks, Black and white, and a few Latinas, including Miss Varcella, who decided to test the integration of the bus system. So like similar to what we see would be Greyhound today. They tested the bus system because those are considered public accommodations to see if they would allow Black people on them. Another case was when a young man integrated the University of Mississippi. Again, that's a public university, and you have to have equal because the Supreme Court just said that. Another case was again with the University of Alabama. In 1963 in Birmingham, that's when the 4 little girls in the church were firebombed and died. And then there were all these student protests, and Dr. Martin Luther King wound up in the Birmingham jail and wrote the letter. In 1963, we had the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave the I Have a Dream speech. And in the summer of 1964 was the Freedom Summer, where folks were working hard to get representation in Congress for Black people in the South. So I'm going to move forward and talk about the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I just want to check in with my interpreters in the chat to make sure I am not going too fast. If somebody will let me know. Okay. All right, under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it essentially said that no person in the United States based on race, color, or national origin be excluded from participation or be denied benefits or be subject to discrimination for any program or activity that gets any federal financial aid or financial monies. Hold on. There we go. So the Civil Rights Act basically has what we call protected classes. And protected classes are essentially groups of people that the federal government says you cannot discriminate against. These protected classes are based on race, color, national origin, disability, religion, age, sex or gender, citizenship, or sexual orientation. I'm seeing a comment here. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, thank you. So those are the protected classes in the United States. My screen has froze for a second. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed and signed into law by the president, and basically it outlawed discrimination based on race in the United States. So that included those Jim Crow laws I talked about that were happening in the Deep South, which segregated African Americans. So essentially the Civil Rights Act, again, which was signed into law in July of 1964, it did a couple of really important things. It established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It basically empowered the Justice Department to start prosecuting cases based on discrimination, based on race, color, sex, national origin, etc. And that's related to jobs. And then it outlawed segregation in public schools. Excuse me, it outlawed segregation in any public accommodations like the drinking fountain, the restrooms, the train stations, etc. And it then came back and said, now we are going to require every school in this country to desegregate. So you have to let Black and brown children into these schools, or you're now violating federal law and we will come after you. And again, keep in mind, a lot of these victories were based on legal precedents that was set 10 to 20 years before with Latinx community and their legal teams. So in 1965, you all know that we here in Georgia and across the country and the world just lost Congressman John Lewis about a month ago, but he marched across that bridge in Selma, Alabama. Many of you know that image, it's seared in your brains. But right after that happened, President Johnson said, we need to pass a voting rights bill. And he did, and he signed it into law in 1965. And it outlawed literacy tests, poll taxes, and it gave the federal government oversight to make sure that voting happened properly in this country without any coercion or lynchings or problems that people of color would face at the polls. So now we're going to move to some additional civil rights actions that I think are pretty phenomenal. In 1965, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta founded the United Farm Workers Association in California. This was the largest and the biggest farm worker union in the country at the time. Ms. Huerta, who is still going strong in my shiro, I was at her, was it her 90th birthday party, Adriana, a couple months ago? She became the first woman to lead a union. And then under their leadership, they joined a strike with Filipino grape pickers in Delano, California. And so the grape boycott became one of the most significant social justice movements for farmers across the United States. So while all this is happening in 1965, all across the country, Black people, brown people were starting to get really frustrated and upset with the lack of the federal government stepping in and protecting these hard-earned civil rights. And they were still facing discrimination. And so riots broke out across the country. And these are just some of the images of the riots in different parts of the world. Coincidentally, my parents met at the riots. So now we're going to move to 1968. And in Los Angeles, there were a group of Latinx high school students who decided to stage walkouts across the Los Angeles Unified School District because they were being treated unfairly in their high schools. In fact, they were told they couldn't speak Spanish on school property. They were not allowed to use the bathrooms there at lunch, and they were basically told, you know, you're not good enough to go to college, so they weren't even letting them speak with college counselors. And so these kids decided that they were going to stage a walkout. And during that walkout, they were beat by the police. There was ridicule from folks across the state and of course, the people who showed up outside the school. 13 kids were arrested for disorderly conduct and for conspiracy charges. What is also little known is that a huge number of African-American students joined them in this walkout in solidarity. Because of these brave high school students, there was school reform. There was reform that happened in the Los Angeles School District, and it dramatically increased the number of Latinx youth who actually went to college. In 1974, there was a case involving Chinese Americans in public schools. And so what the school said was that, you know, y'all just have to learn English. And they weren't trying to help the young Chinese American students, learn both in English and Chinese so that they can pick up the information. And so the parents sued and said, look, you guys are saying you don't want to help them learn English by, incorporating their native language, and you're not allowing them to speak their native language in the school, and this is discriminatory. So these parents, with their legal team, sued the school district, and this was in San Francisco. And this is an important case because this laid the foundation for all other immigrant groups as well in the United States. And so in 1974, the Equal Educational Opportunity Act was passed into law, which required bilingual education be made available in public schools around the country. In 1975, after the non-English speakers testified about discrimination they were facing when they went to vote at the polls, Congress decided to expand the Voting Rights Act to require language assistance at the polls. So that was another huge victory, not just for Spanish speakers, but for all non-English speakers. This also helped Native Americans, Asian Americans, Alaska Natives as well. The original Voting Rights Act that passed in 1965, and this is 10 years later, was intentionally geared towards African Americans and Puerto Ricans. And this expansion included all folks now. And then with the passing of this act, this led to increased political representation of the Latinx community in US politics and Congress, etc. And so Native Americans, as I call them, First Nation, are the first true Americans in this country. And they have a really unique status under US law. Indian tribes are considered distinct governments. And under the American Indian movement in 1968, they really wanted to address poverty and police brutality. Like, no surprise, we're still dealing with police brutality. And it also helped to revive the sort of indigenous pride, and they demanded respect. And in 1968, they further went on to have the Indian Civil Rights Act, which passed and gave Native Americans constitutional rights and recognized the right of Native Americans to make their own laws on reservations. I'm just going to do a quick time check. All right. So there are tons of other groups that have really benefited from these civil rights acts and protections. There, of course, were women, obviously the Latinx community, Asian Americans, First Nations, as well as the LGBTQAI community as well. And I just want to say out loud that we can make this PowerPoint presentation available to anyone. If you can just let us know in the chat, we will get that to you. And so I want to talk a little bit. Leonie, how are we doing on time?
We are doing fine. We're at 6:44.
Okay. All right. And so I want to talk a little bit about sort of where we are right now with civil rights in this country. We obviously have a number of laws that protect us. Again, the Civil Rights Acts, which we talked about, the educational amendments, and the amendment in 72 prohibits sex discrimination. There is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 73, which prohibits disability discrimination. And of course, there is the American with Disabilities Act, right? So disabled folks need to have access to public entities, and they can't be discriminated against. There's also acts that protect, civil rights acts that protect age discrimination, education, and crime victims as well. So I wanted to sort of open up a discussion to folks, and we're going to open up the floor soon for questions and dialogue. But I want you all to think about what sort of civil rights issues are we facing today? Do you feel like we are a desegregated society? Are we equal now? Are there other groups that I haven't talked about that are facing civil rights questions or discriminations today? Matthew raised his hand. Okay, Matthew will be with you in a second. And then as I close out, I just wanted to sort of share a few thoughts in terms of the future of civil rights in this country. And I think that we all understand that our civil rights are being encroached upon, they're being weakened, and our protections are beginning to shift away. But there's some areas that we should focus our energies and efforts on, whether it's at the ballot box or whether it's talking to our elected officials, that we should focus our energies on in terms of protections. I would argue it should involve racial equality. We should work on civil rights. These are civil rights challenges that we are all facing. So it's racial inequality, police brutality and misconduct, poor and inferior public schools, economic inequality, Islamophobia, xenophobia, unsafe and unjust working conditions, health disparities, and voter suppression. Those are some of the civil rights challenges I see facing us in the future that we need to collectively work on. So I think some of the opportunities that exist for us to focus on that is to partner with the Movement for Black Lives, to work together on fair federal immigration policy, to focus on income equality, to work on affordable housing, to focus our energies on fair wages and employment, and to focus on strengthening our voting rights, particularly for Native Americans as well. I'm going to close there. I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint, and we're going to open up the floor. 1 second. Okay, I'm going to the Q&A now. Okay. Asia, do you want me to just take the 2 in the Q&A? Okay.
Can I say something just before you take them?
Yes,
just
please.
about them, just informational. I'll say a little closing later, but I just wanted to proudly say that 2 of the folks on there are interns with Working Family Solidarity, both here in Chicago. And I just want to explain, some of our interns are youngsters, teenagers, but some are adults that have quite a history of activism themselves in their own communities. So Reverend Walker McClure is on, as is Antoinette Campbell as well. So anyway, I just wanted to say shout out to both of them, and this has been really great for, especially for some of the younger interns that really don't know about this history. Thank you.
All right, so I'm seeing in the chat from Dave Becker, absolutely, mass incarceration is definitely a challenge that is before us, and we need to focus our energies on that. I see a question from Karen Walker McClure, which Leonie just mentioned. You asked that we please speak about Native Americans being considered a distinct nation. Actually, I'm gonna let Leonie take that one because that's sort of one of the things he's passionate about.
Yeah, I very passionate and not necessarily an expert on it. It is something though, Reverend, and asking the question, Reverend Walker McClure and others on the call today, this is an area that is very important for us at Working Family Solidarity, and we want to actually deepen our solidarity with Indigenous groups, Native Americans, because in my experience, not as an expert, but someone who has spent time on, the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, where the shootings occurred many years ago. Some of us are old enough to remember that in our really young days. The incident in Oglala, the Sitting Bull Ranch, the shooting of FBI agents, and so on. The reason we decided not to try to tackle the Indigenous question this particular time, but we wanted to at least recognize it and say something about it, is when we talk about civil rights, most of us will think Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Abernathy, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and so on. And well, we should. Well, we should, because many people in the South, African Americans in the South, have really been the boost to get to the Voting Rights Act and Brown versus Board of Education and so on, which many of us, in my opinion, as a Latino, have benefited more than African Americans who sacrificed to get so many of those particular laws. But we'll continue dialoguing. But what we wanted to do, Reverend, and then others who are listening, is at least mention the Indigenous and Native American question, because some of them can be covered under civil rights laws if they're living in Chicago, if they're not an official member of a nation. But some of them, and usually to their detriment, usually in a very negative, manipulative way, the US government has said, well, you're the Cherokee Nation, you're the Sioux Nation, you're the Crow Nation, you're the so-and-so nation, and so our laws don't apply to you, but you're so lucky because you have your own nation. And of course, we moved you thousands of miles away from your original home, stuck you somewhere in the corner of the United States, and decided to tell you that that piece of rock and dirt is a wonderful nation, and killed many people getting them there. Then, of course, suddenly gold or uranium is found, right? Like the Hopi Nation in the Southwest and Navajo Nation, and suddenly, oh, well, maybe that's actually part of the US. So we wanted to touch on that question because the United States government has manipulated it's like they've figured out ways, this is my view, how to hurt all of us, and they just do it in slightly different ways. So for Black folks, it's a certain way. And so for the Indigenous folks, it's been a different way. And so we wanted to at least recognize that, and in the future, we'll come back to it.
Okay, so Leonie, the interpreters are telling us to slow down when we respond. Okay.
Sorry.
All right, so the next question is, I've seen that this country is still not over desegregation. If we take a closer look at our societal structures, there are always people who are mostly people of color that are always being degraded to the point where certain communities get more funding because of their different data or the predominance of races there. I would definitely agree with that statement. I'm trying to look at other questions. Asia, am I seeing other questions? Another, Antoinette says that the Turkish Muslims in China are currently being oppressed as well. Someone in the comments said the Lebanese community has been discriminated against a lot in the past few months. So are there any hands raised, Asia? Another question is, what do the panelists think is a way to respond to people who say that we have different interests that do not overlap, especially when talking about the Black and Latinx communities in Chicago? It seems to me that a lot of people don't know the overlapping histories of Black and Latinx struggles for equality. So this is a great segue to the next virtual dialogue we'll be having on October 2nd. We're going to be talking exclusively 7th, yeah, October 7th. We'll be talking exclusively about Black and Brown communities working together for racial unity. But yeah, I don't think people know enough of the history, and I'm really happy to share this PowerPoint with you all so that you can share this out into the community as well. We have a question that says, do you ever feel that racism will end really? Because until our laws and hearts change, there will be hatred, and that is taught. I'm optimistic that we will all one day get to the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about. I think it is a constant struggle. The oppression of peoples of color and poor people in this country is cyclical. When one group gets some rights, another group's rights get trampled on. So we have to be in sync and coordinated and united in our fights, because it's all of us. It's not just one of us. We always have to support the least of these. Otherwise, we won't get change in this country. And change is only achieve through force and from people from the ground up forcing the systems to change. But I think it's possible. I think we're knee deep in forcing change right now in this country. See.
Can I add something to
Yes,
that?
please.
So, I mean, what I think, my biggest passion for the last 32 years of my adult life has been building a racial unity that's based on an honest assessment of racism. So not a fake racial unity, kumbaya, let's all join hands, black, white, brown, we're all the same. We're not the same. We're not the same, right? We want to be the same. And so what we have to do is mark where we're trying to get to, and then with an honest support of each other, we can get there. Benetta talked a little bit about the farm worker movement, and we're going to talk more about this on October 7th about racial unity in instances, especially Black and Brown communities. I spent 10 years in that movement before I came back to the Midwest in 1999 to Milwaukee and then later down to Chicago. But those first strikes, not only like Benetta mentioned, were started by Filipino workers,
Yep.
not Mexicanos, right? Filipinos. Dolores and Cesar at that time wanted to wait a little bit longer to start the strike. The Filipinos, for various reasons, did not, and I'll leave out the details. They came to Cesar and Dolores's fledgling union, at that time called the United States Farm Worker Association, the United Farm Worker Association, out of a garage in Delano, and asked for support. They got it. All kinds of things later happened, but there were all kinds of laws that kept those Filipino men, only men could come in, work, and they could live and literally die of old age in the United States, but they could not marry. So it was a way of keeping these folks not quite as slaves, but like indentured servants and worse. And so there's a whole history. The first martyr, the first United Farm Worker organizer killed by a Kern County sheriff when he hit him with like a 6-pound giant flashlight and just crushed his skull, was a young brother named Naji Daifala, an Arab American. The Yemeni workers were brought in from the Arabian Peninsula to work in the fields as well. Haitian workers in Florida, Black Haitian workers. So there's a whole history of unity. And the reason I'm bringing this up now, talking a little bit about, hope you'll join us on October 7th, but whether we like it or not, in any real talk, we have to talk about people of color, especially poor people of color, and the vast majority of us are poor or moderate income, coming together to defend our interests, thinking of what the brothers and sisters just said now in those questions about how is it going to end. We do need, I think, the moral change, the love in our heart, but like Martin Luther King Jr. said, you know, legislation may not make a man love me. That might take morality and religion, but it can keep him from lynching me. And that's pretty important too. So we need to continue to have much better laws. And then beyond that, working family solidarity has been a part of, and we want to continue to be a part of, a broader movement organizing at the community level to support each other in jobs, support each other in housing and other basics. So we think that that's where our strength lies, is that no one else will do the dirty work in this country but us Black and Latinos and some others, right? And that's why we're dying so much of COVID, because we can't stop going to work. But we can also turn that around as a strength. And because no one else will do that, and we're so many of us, our problem is we don't have power because we're not united. So I just want to say that I think we need to unite to support each other. And I think, you know, we saw a little bit of that tonight. We're going to talk more about it on October 7th, but that's what working family solidarity believes.
Thank you, Lanny. So I'm actually going to open up the dialogue, and I'm going to bring in Kay Bands first, who posed a question. And then next, I'm going to go to Miss Thornton. So let me scroll and find Kay Bands real quick. And I'm going to
say that that's Kevin Ansures, another intern and a great young brother.
Okay. Kevin, ask your question, please. Okay, please make sure you're not muted, Kevin. Kevin,
Can you hear us?
Okay, go ahead, Kevin. Kevin, can you hear us? Can you ask your question? Okay, we're going to go to Ms. Thompson.
Can we just read it?
Sure,
Just since
absolutely.
we can't hear him.
Sure. If there is ever someone who enters the White House and really wants change, do you think that there will be change where there is some form of unity and equality without biases? So honestly, I don't think and Working Family Solidarity is a nonprofit organization and they're nonpartisan. So we can't really speak to folks running for office and discussing who might be better over another candidate. But what I will say is that the two-party system in the United States doesn't work. It doesn't allow for other positions or opinions to be heard, other perspectives. The Electoral College routinely ignores the will of the people when they elect people into the presidential office. And so I think we have to shake things up. I think we're going to have to shift the entire dynamic around presidential elections to get folks in that space who really gonna represent us. And when I say us, I mean poor folks and I mean people of color in this country. And I think when you get someone in that position who really respects the communities we represent, we can hold them to the fire to represent our interests. Will biases change? I don't know, because as one of the attendees said earlier, a lot of this discrimination and prejudice is taught, and we have to unteach it. And I'm really hopeful with young people. I'll be 50 later this month. I'm really hopeful that the young people are seeing across gender identities and genders and races and ethnicities and national origins, and are working together, particularly surrounding the movement for Black lives, and also in the reproductive justice movement, which is an interesting dynamic. So I'm hopeful that the young people will push us further in this country. Leonie, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I'll just briefly say, and I see someone else had a great question and comment. And please also, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Benetta, but I think that if someone wants to ask their question, on video or make their comment on video, I think what Benetta's trying to do, what I saw with Kevin, was try to accommodate so someone can come on. It's just we have a lot of participants, so we didn't want to fill this, a couple of screens with tiny little photos. So I'll simply say, Kevin, and to others, I think it is important who's in office, federally, state, and locally, and that people should work on that. What I believe, and I feel like I learned when I was a teenager, because my mom's from Mexico and was a community activist. My stepfather was an African-American community activist. And what I learned at a young age is we need good laws and we need good public officials, but nothing replaces a well-organized community of people that pushes forward these officials to do the right thing when they feel pressure from big business not to do it. So we need good public officials, but we need to strengthen the community-based organizations across the United States.
Thank you. I'm going to allow Ms. Thornton to ask her question now. Ms. Thornton, you can speak now.
Are you muted? I see Miss Thornton, I see Monique as well, both interns of ours. I'm very proud of that, and good sisters too. We can't hear you, Quinn.
Okay, Ms. Thornton, I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself. Ms. Thornton, I think I can hear you now.
Yes. Yes. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Quinn,
Please ask your question.
Hi.
fire away.
I really didn't have, you know, so much of a question, but I just wanted to get more information in regards to people being more aware of the civil rights for Native Americans. I would like to know more about different individuals who have either made it possible for their, you know, injustices to even be looked upon, so to speak. So I would want to know more about you know, what rights are available to them and things of that nature, so I can be able to aware other, you know, make sure other people are aware of this as well.
So, Ms. Thornton, if you can contact me and Leonie separately, we
Okay.
can get you some additional information here. We really skimmed the surface here because we wanted to talk about all kinds of groups of people, but we didn't pull the specifics.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
If I can just say something that I agree, because I think the value is learning how this particular system has chosen very specific ways to oppress certain groups, especially of color. So, you know, I think there's been a plan and still is for Black people. A little bit different for Latinx community, especially around immigration and stuff. A little bit different for Asians. A little bit different for Native Americans, and so on. Middle Eastern, you know, Islamophobia. So I think I agree with you, Q, because I think the more we learn about how other communities have been done, then we can kind of also come back and unravel what's happened to our community, and we end up coming back up to see that in some ways they're different, but in many ways they came from the exact same group of people. So I think that's important.
Okay, hold on. Let me mute Miss Monique.
Put your headphones.
Is that you, Monique?
I'm trying
Yes.
to mute her.
I think Monique can talk. We just can't see you.
Monique, did you have a question?
Sorry, Monique.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say, regards to equal rights, that I mean we're still dealing with some of the same issues that were up in the forefront before I was born. So I just want to say that it's something that we need to work towards improving.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Monique. I'm going to go to, I believe I see Leah with her hand raised. Leah, I'm going to open it up for you to ask a question.
Also, I think
Yes.
Dave Becker
Can you hear
had a
me?
long comment.
Just
Can
one
you-
second. Yes, 1 second.
No, I was just going to say, I'm sorry. Just I think Dave, that might be actually Bernard Little, who's one of our interns as well. But he had a long comment that I don't know if he wanted us to kind of acknowledge or something.
Yeah, I'm gonna have him come up next.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Ms. Leah?
Yes, I would like to get some information. Is with so much going on, and with you know, the police killings, the the COVID-19, and how minority communities have been treated. I just see that there's priority, urgent priority in the Black community to address these issues. And I know that there's other biases and discrimination against other groups, but I just see that the Black community is in sore need of rescue. And so whatever we can do to make it better, I just think that we need to focus. And I just want to get your opinion. Is it, I'm not knocking any other groups, but I just feel that the Black community is in need of some help. It's long overdue, and it just seems as though we can be put in a position where other people's needs will get met before ours. And I just like people to comment. Am I wrong thinking that way? But that's how I feel.
Thank you, Ms. Leah. No, I don't think you're wrong. I think that communities of color are being the hardest hit by COVID-19. African Americans are being hit, particularly in the southern states where we're larger in number, at such significant amounts that we're losing significant parts of our families. Until we have, whether it's local, state, or federal officials who acknowledge the severity of this pandemic and appropriate the resources and disperse them equally and disperse them based on an equity model, we're not going to get at this. I think we're all going to be under quarantine for another year. This is not going away. And I think one of the things that we can do as a member of the African American community is we can join our voices together and use our advocacy organizations to herald our voice and to make a lot of noise and to, quite frankly, publicly shame elected officials and government entities who are not providing testing and resources and PPE to our communities to keep us safe. I would echo that for the Latinx community. I would echo that for the First Nation community, et cetera, because poor people who live in urban and rural areas, who don't have adequate housing, who don't have adequate food supplies, who are subject to environmental harms, are going to be the hardest hit because we're already in depreciated environments that are causing harm to us daily, not to mention the psychological harm. But I think one of the ways that we can collectively make noise and get our voices heard is to work with state and national groups to herald our message and, quite frankly, publicly shame those folks who are not doing what they can to get the resources to the communities that need it most.
I'll add, if it's okay, just as a Latino, I think what you said is very important. I have no problem supporting African Americans. In fact, what I've spent a good chunk of my adult life talking to other people in the Latinx community is, as African Americans go, so go we. So when 200,000 African American folks have been pushed out of Chicago in the last 15 years, I think, it's my opinion, that not enough Latinos, there's actually a number of us, but not enough percentage of our population is deeply concerned about that. I think we should all see that as a terrible occurrence, and that we're next, right? And so we have to support African Americans. You know, how did Harold Washington win way back in the 80s? He
Right.
won with the vast majority vote of people of color, not just African Americans, but Rudy Lozano, right, the Puerto Rican who brought so many Latinos, who was assassinated shortly after the mayor won, partly for promoting Black and Latino unity, right? That's my opinion. And so if you look at the numbers in the United States, one of the reasons we're getting such a backlash from white supremacist groups is that people of color are roughly becoming now 50% of the population.
Each.
And that means we have some power if we're united. So I have absolutely no problem supporting the really, really desperate needs of African Americans, because at some point we're going to have to shake off what we're trained to do. I'm trained to think that Latinos are my people. But what does that really mean? Because I can tell you a whole lot of Latinos that will not fight for their rights. They want to be rich. They don't care about undocumented Latinos coming into this country, right? But supposedly, because they're Latino, I'm supposed to be down with them. I'm not down with them. Not if they hate other groups. Latinos who don't like Blacks, they're not my people, period, right? And I'm hoping that Blacks who also see that same approach, like Benetta, that's how we connected long ago. We need the numbers, right, to have some power. So that's kind of our plea, is if we can build a unity based on a sincere, not fake, sincere discussion of racism and how we all are trained to hate each other, Blacks and Latinx especially, right? I look at Benetta, I look at her as competition for a job. That's how I look at her, right? I look at her as competition for that Section 8 housing spot, because there's 10,000 of them and there's 500,000 people applying. And so we're driven to compete, and that's wrong. And we somehow have to find a way to see each other as brothers and sisters. And when kids are killed, they're our kids. They're not their kids. And so that's what we're trying to get to.
Thank you, Leonie. I'm going to open up David Becker to either ask his question or David, are you up?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So just really quick, I just wanted to also just add to what Leon just said. So the Children's Defense Fund, one of the things that they just recognized is that 2020 is the first year in which the number of children born in the United States, that the number of children who are children of color outnumber the number of children who are white. And it kind of relates to the point that I made or was making in the chat box or in the question, is that I think an important piece of this work too is recognizing how organized white nationalist organizations are and how linked they are and how long that's been going on. We sometimes have this tendency to think of hate as this individual thing, and that if we're, and there is that, it's important to change individual hearts and minds. But when we look at what's happening at the southern border right now, and what we just heard about the women who are experiencing forced sterilization, that's been building for decades from the same organizations, and you know, and they're funded and organized and influencing public policy. So I think there's that piece too, to just like being able to be aware of what is happening on the other side and not think of it only as an individual item, but really being vigilant and you know, being able to cut some of those policies off at the head, but also knowing who some of these folks are that are either running for office or are funding politicians.
Thank you, David. Did you want to add anything there? I know you wanted to make a point about the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Oh yeah, so I said, you know, one organization, you know, that and they're not the only one, but the Southern Poverty Law Center is one of the organizations that just really, through their hate watch, tracking some of the policies and some of the groups, and really keeps a watchful eye. There's others as well, but I just want to raise that as a point of awareness in terms of thinking about that being. I used to think that eventually prejudice would just go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clearly it's not. And again, that that these groups they're organized. They are organized.
Thank you. I'm going to try to go back to Kevin in a second, but I want to just share with you all yesterday, Project South here in Atlanta, Georgia, filed a lawsuit against Irwin Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia, and that's how they pronounce it here, Ocilla. Filed a lawsuit against that ICE facility. The whistleblower was an African-American nurse. Mm-hmm. This facility obviously houses Latinx immigrants, and she obviously comes in contact with them on a daily basis. She filed a whistleblower lawsuit stating that people are being infected with COVID because there's no protections for them, that ICE is underreporting the numbers, and that they provide no PPE for not only the folks that are housed there, but for the staff as well. And so she filed that complaint with the Homeland Security Department, with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and then she reached out to legal advocacy organizations across the state. They held a lawsuit. They held a press conference announcing their lawsuit yesterday. And I just want to say that the community that ICE facility sits in is like 70% African American. That ICE facility is the major employer for counties all around it. Most of the government officials and positions are held by white people, but it was very brave of this Black woman to stand up on behalf of these immigrants in this facility. She also noted that they were sterilizing Latinas without their consent. And so there's a movement, there's a movement happening right now that I'm a part of, where we've decided we're gonna wrap our arms around this sister and support her. And this may be a 3-year fight, because she's already getting death threats and hate mail. There are fake social media pages going up, claiming to be her. There's GoFundMe campaigns going up. We're figuring out how we can relocate her out of that county because it's not safe. She's a single mom of young kids. And so I want to just say there are folks around the country, just like Miss Nurse Dawn Wooten, who believe in humanity and know how to do the right thing, and we will stand up for each other. And so I just wanted to share that with you all.
Can I just say really quickly, I do want to underscore, and I won't say much because we don't have time, but just, let's keep talking today and in other days in these webinars and upcoming dialogues and in other stuff. But the white supremacist group, the white nationalist group, now with Google and so on and computers, you can learn a lot. But I have some personal experience fighting those groups and being targeted by those groups from work I've done in the farm worker movement in rural counties, and work I did in the Southeast and in the Plain States on racial unity efforts around meat packing and poultry processing in the South and in the Plain States. And some of those counties, were very unhappy that we were there. But they are organized, and I won't say this like Benetta said, we're politically independent, but unfortunately those people, Mr. Becker and for others, they now have a champion. at the highest office in our country. And unfortunately, that has really emboldened them, you know, to come out. So yes, we gotta really keep an eye out.
All right, I'm just dropping in the ICE whistleblower lawsuit in case you all want to track it and go to it later. I'm going to open up the questions for Kevin Vance.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, having mic issues and not actually having a mic on hand was somewhat, you know, on my part, somewhat my bad on my part. So, on to the point. So, I can definitely agree to what Leonie said earlier, just like right before you guys passed the mic towards me. I could definitely agree with like these white nationalists thinking that just because they have somebody on their corner, or in this case, in the office, literally like supplying ammunition to them, I do believe that there's just some sort of topic that can trigger conversations where it could have a good outcome, but at the same time, it could also have a bad outcome. And so, like, just in our community here, what I wanted to, like, just in Chicago, just basically here in Chicago, I wanted to ask, like, if we ever got together, or if there's a group of people who are willing to make enough, like, noise and get, you know, funds redirected towards communities who need it the most, is it a possibility that could ever happen here in Chicago? And could that, you know, go out to like the rest of the nation to get people to speak up for those who need it the most?
Leonie, I'll defer to you in terms of Chicago activism.
Well, and you know, first of all, thanks, Kevin. I know Kevin, I know his family here in Chicago, and absolutely, it's possible. And again, you know, I just don't have the time. If we had hours more, I would literally read every name of the participants. I know almost all of you. Some are like super distinguished activists, like seriously, they could be running this whole webinar. So it's easy for me to say yes, Kevin, because a lot of the people, and I won't have time to say, but you know, maybe later you and I can talk, but there's people just on this call, and there's so many competing things this evening, actually. One, Kevin, is by some other groups that are soliciting input exactly to push the mayor's office to redirect budget priorities towards low and moderate income communities, Kev. So largely Black and Latinx communities, right, in Chicago. So the answer is, it partly what happens, Kev, like a lot of you guys in high school and stuff, right? You don't get the history, you get a little slice of it. And the reality is, I'm a little bit older now. I've been around a few decades in the movement, and I've been through nasty things, but I've also seen people who've done incredible sacrifices for other people, like heroes who no one knows their names. You all know what I'm talking about. A lot of you, again, on this call, I'd like to read all your names, but you've been doing this a long time. And we all know those Kevin, right? You, Kevin, you've been interviewed by TV, right? to talk about racism in Chicago, right? And why are you still talking? And there's your answer, brother. If you keep getting up every day and you look at this system and you say, you know what? You have not convinced me that this is the best we can do, we've won. Like one of my early mentors said, there's a reason we call the oppressor, and that's because they are stronger than we are. And it hurts a little bit to admit that, right? But they can't oppress you unless they have the power to oppress you. But they have not won till they've crushed our spirit. So that's the key for us, Kev. They haven't crushed our spirit. I get older, I get angrier. A lot of my friends say, how come you're so passionate? You know, you're supposed to get more mellow with age. I've gotten angry every damn year of my life, okay? And I just turned 57. a few days ago. I'm way more angry today than I was when I was 18, way more. And people, if you're not livid angry, then you're not thinking and you're not seeing, right? We can do this, Kev. We have the numbers. There's way more of us. The problem is we're driven to get up at 4 in the morning, right? And work till 9 at night and then go to sleep. We don't have time. We don't have the luxury to talk, to analyze, to relax a minute, to figure out how we're going to work together with others. So it's a challenge, Kev, but absolutely the fact that you're still doing this, right, is a great, great answer to your question.
So thank you, Leonie. I see a comment in the question and answer, and it's anonymous, but I'll just read it out loud to make sure everyone sees it. But the comment was, we have to learn to be allies for one another, to be collective. I certainly agree. United, we can bring about any change we need.
One thing, again, I'm still making, you know, a pitch for folks to come back on the 7th and on the 28th, but you know, I understand people are busy, maybe others come and not everyone get back on, but whether it's then or in a different form, let's all stay together. We'll have to, you know, end a little bit soon here, but one thing that I think we often don't talk enough about and then work together on is it's not like we get up in the morning and naturally look at another group and naturally hate them. That's a taught behavior. And so there's always been prejudice, right? Thousands of years. That group is a little different. Hey, wait a minute. This is our group. That's their group. So we're a little nervous. We kind of wonder what that group's like. But the current really, really wealthy elite that, you know, the 1%, 2%, depending on your statistic, 5%, that own 95%, 90%, 99% of the wealth in this country and the world, we have to analyze how they figured out this system, this political economy, right? This economic system that forces people of color and some poor whites to fight amongst each other, right? So we are put in positions where we go to that temp labor agency at 4 in the morning, right? At 26th and Trumbull or wherever it might be in Chicago. And the Latinos fight against the Black folks. And the Asians fight against the Polish, and the men against the women, and so on, because we're forced to have very few options. And so we're going to fight other people, right, to try to make our opportunities come true. So I know we won't have time tonight, but as we go forward in this series, and then later on when we do some racial unity dialogues, we're going to bring in more our political economy, our economic system, right? We're not going to talk in jargons, and we're not going to talk in isms. We're going to talk about how we figure out if you base a system on greed, right? You promote greed. You do whatever maximizes your profits. That's what we're taught in high school, right? And that will automatically help everyone else. That is the American way, and it's failed. It's just flat out failed, and it's based on the disempowerment of people of color. So we have to come back on the 7th, other days, right? Let's talk, because we can't just say, well, gosh, we have to like each other. The economic system is set up for us to continue to compete. And so we're going to have to work together on worker issues as we restructure this society to destroy racism.
Thank you, Leonie. So we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to allow Leonie to close us out. So I'm going to go to, is it Arwena? It's editing laptop, but I know who it is. I think I have you up now. Jorena Hope. Can you unmute yourself, Jorena? Jorena, do you want to share your comment?
I'm very proud to say she's connected to Working Family Solidarity.
Oh, okay, great.
Hopefully we can hear from her.
Jorena, you should be able to speak now. Can you unmute yourself?
Doesn't look like that's happening.
Okay, so Jorina, I am going to,
Uh-oh, wait a
oh, there
second.
she is. I see your video. Can you try talking?
Are you muted? Can't hear you. We might have to, can you write your question?
Oh, it's on the screen. I can read it.
We might have to go with that because probably some other people will need to leave.
Okay, so Jorina, I'm going to read your question or your comment. It says, I'm very angry with the police brutality and the racists who just kill us because of our color. I hate it for real, for real. Yes, I'm really angry. I mean, hey, right on, sister. Yeah, we have to continue to fight and stand up and advocate for ourselves. Change is only made in this country when people on the ground force it to happen. And oftentimes that means exercising our protected First Amendment right to protest and peacefully assemble and to have our voices heard. So I'm really proud of the people across this country, Black, white, Latinx, Asian, First Nation, who are out protesting and still are protesting after the horrible murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And so people continue to fight and advocate. And I think the more we make ourselves heard, the more likely we are to get change in this country. So thank you, Jorina. Thank you. Okay, Asia, is there anything else before we? Jason says, do you guys think there's going to be change with the Black Lives Movement going on? Yes, I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. What about you, Leonie?
Yeah, I'm optimistic for sure. I mean, I hate to say it like this. I mean it very positive that we have no one will help us but us. And again, as you can tell, maybe I'm too obsessed with this, but I think without the racial unity, I tend to think first between people of color, poor people of color, which most people of color. I think that's where we build our unity first. Then we reach out to poor whites to see which one of those folks can overcome their racism, right? And realize that they also don't have a house and they don't have health care and they don't have a job. And there's a whole lot we can do together. So I think Black Lives Matter is really important. I think what I've learned, and I don't say we do this perfectly, we got to be better at working family solidarity, but I think what we have to do is movements are built on structure in the community. And if we don't have structure in the community among movement organizations, like Working Family Solidarity and a whole lot others, right? Not just us, obviously, we're one vehicle. There's so many other great ones. What we have to structure and organize ourselves in every neighborhood, or our energy will sort of be, we're angry over here, we're kind of angry over there, then we're angry over here, and then we're angry over there. And boy, were we angry. But it has to be every single day of our life, even if we weren't beaten by the police the night before, we have to get up every single night and fight for that change like it's the last day we're alive on earth. When we do that and we have the structure, which a lot of people on this call have been about in a lot of their organizations, right? It really is about that base building leaders, not one or two quote unquote great leaders. We need thousands of leaders like that nurse who spoke up, right, in Georgia. We need thousands of leaders in our community, a lot who are on this call right now or who don't know they're a great leader yet and are going to be one next week. And what we have to do is build that leadership from the ground up. And then who's going to stop us, right? Because we got nothing to lose. They won't stop us. We just have to turn that anger into high level of organization.
So Leonie, I think now is the time for you to close us out with your final remarks.
Yeah, well, I've been having my final remarks all night, like you all have listened to, so I'm not going to say much. Again, I really honestly, like, thank God every day of my life that I'm still as angry as I was 32 years ago, when I literally sat quiet in a corner and pledged that for as long as I'm on earth, I'm going to fight as hard as I can. Not perfect, and I'll make mistakes, but that I really want to be part of building an entire new way of doing things in this country, where human beings are valued. And I will also say that when I was a little guy, I had family members who were anthropologists. And one thing they told me is physical anthropology recognizes exactly one race on Earth. One. Homo sapiens sapien. There's one type of people on the entire Earth. So I don't look exactly like Benetta, but I also don't look like some of my own family members.
Right.
And on my my biological dad, Italian side, if they're live in places in rural Italy, they're a lot darker than I am too. So the minor differences, because of different areas our ancestors lived in, colder climates, hot climates, however we adapted, there's still one race of human beings. There's not 5, there's not 10, there's not 20. All of this other stuff has been taught to us so that we don't unite. Because once people figure out that melanin, right, melatonin in our skin and so forth is a silly distinction, right, and that we all need a place to live, income, and so on, the gig is up, right? It's over. It's over. Because then we realize, like the ants realized in the grasshoppers, right, in It's a Bug's Life, or A Bug's Life, and all these other ones, we suddenly wake up and realize, oh my God, we're like the vast majority of people on earth and in this country, working people that get up every day, sell our labor to someone else, right? And we fight other people for that right to do it instead of working together. So hopefully, as we lead into October 7th with racial unity instances, and then move to the other criminal justice on October 28th, and then move into other racial unity dialogues, maybe you'll be there with us on those nights or in other ways. Once again, I really have had to hold back to not read the list of everyone on today, because I'm talking to you. If you're listening to me, you all know that I respect each and every one of you here. You're all doing incredible work. You all could have done this whole webinar yourself. And I really appreciate the respect you showed to come on and support. And together, let's get this thing done.
Leonie, did you want to acknowledge any of our sponsors, organizers, staff?
I did. Well, I'll acknowledge you again. Again, when Benetta and I met years ago, I felt like I met a long lost sister. I have 2 brothers, because we really saw that we agreed on the game that's being run on us, right? And we're tired of being part of it. Adriana Avila McClintock, who's been behind the scenes tonight, but again, our communications development person, we go back so many years. She's been part of the labor movement. She worked as a consultant on marketing in so many places. You know, the interpreters are awesome. Somos Sur, terrific. We also want to applaud Cook County for doing the Cook County Racial Equity Week. That's been very, very important. I'm actually a member of the Community Advisory Committee of the Cook County Racial Equity Office. And so we want to thank them for promoting our work. And then I'll stop there. Again, I guess I'll say our board members, Matthew Robinson and Reverend Felicia Campbell, who've helped lead racial unity dialogues and so on, and they're part of the reason we exist today. I'll stop there because then I'd get into all these other people and I might leave someone out. But so many terrific foundations. We've worked together with On the Table, that has been a project of the Chicago Community Trust for a long time, to have honest dialogues that don't pull punches, and where you respectfully talk about really difficult issues. And so, you know, thanks all of you for being here. We have grown as an organization because you have been a part of it, and I really appreciate it.
So we are going to close out this dialogue. I'm just thrilled that we had so many people join us tonight. I hope it was fruitful. I hope you learned a little. I certainly did. And I invite you to join us back on October 7th for a discussion on Black and Brown unity and fighting for change. And on October 28th, where we'll talk about Black and Brown bodies caught up in this prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Muchas gracias a todos y todas.
Hey, y'all. I wasn't sure if we should stick around or not, but I just.
Oh.
Okay.
I'm waiting. I always wait just because but it gives me a chance to thank you. I look forward to getting to know you better, and I really, and you too, Asia, and it feels like, again, like I said about Benetta, I feel like I've met more long lost sisters from a distance, and yeah, we got a lot we have so much to do, right? But I mean, it's really the spirit of people that changes stuff. It's not really the information, it's more the spirit. And I just feel like you all have a wonderful spirit. So I'm just cool, super glad to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Are you all moved in, and when can I drop off the mezcal?
Benetta's like, let's get down to the
Let's
real
focus
stuff
here.
I'm fully back in. I've unboxed stuff. I have more to unpack, but I'm just like a few folks have told me, just take it one box at a time.
Right.
For better or worse, my workstation was, at least my desk area. Other things around here still need to get officed up, but at least my desk area, of course, is set and ready. So yeah, come on over, Miss Benetta. I'm ready. I'm ready now. I feel like, okay, I can handle
Okay.
this.
I'll hit you up.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Asia.
Of course. I'm just trying to make sure that I got the chat before I go.
They were lit up in the chat.
Yeah, at first it was a little slow, and I was like, okay, but then they, got comfortable, so it was really nice to be able to interact with people.
There was a young person towards the end that asked a question. I just replied directly in the Q&A. He wanted to know, or they wanted to know, what can young people do to stop racism or limit racism and end police brutality? And I encourage them to connect with a local nonprofit in their community that fights for racial justice. I recommended some books that they could read to understand the history of the fight, and something else, I can't remember. And then I told them, just email me if you need me to connect you to somewhere. So.
All right.
All right, Leonie, what did you think?
No, I'm happy with it.
We have, looks like we still have 3 attendees. I'm thinking that must be Claudia under your name. We have Elisa and
no,
Miguel.
I'm under my name. Clau got in. Clau, ¿tú estás todavía? She might still be. She probably is.
Okay.
Adriana logged out, no?
She did. I'm just gonna
So it's you 2, me, and 3 other folks.
Who
else is on?
I'm just gonna hold on one second.
Yeah, I'm not worried. I mean, hey, you're welcome, right? I'm just curious. Probably could be a great friend.
I'm leaving.
Ahora somos 3. Ya se fueron. They left, the other 3.
Okay, I just removed them. That's why. In case you wanted to speak freely.
They left, all right. No, I liked it.
Okay.
I liked it, and again, I really mean it. It was really hard. I decided not to do it, which I think is right. But like some of the people, Marsha Love there was saying, "Hey, thanks working back." She's awesome. I mean, she lived a long time in New York. She's a white lady. She's married to a dude from Holland. She works at University of Illinois Chicago School of Public Health, the Health and Occupational Safety Division.
Was that Rich's teacher?
Marcia was not.
Okay.
No, Richard graduated from Roosevelt University.
Okay.
Marcia's at UIC.
Okay.
But Marcia, it's not impossible that you met her.
I know that name. Yeah.
She was a big, I mean, she's not a young lady, and she's really terrific support of low-wage workers of all backgrounds, and really hammering them for all the horrific ways that they destroy our health on the job, even before COVID-19, right? But she was on there, and at a certain point, I think she had to get off and was said bye-bye. So, I mean, we had Matthew is a great young man. Unfortunately, you didn't have time to meet him. He's a young African-American guy. He's on our board. He's an interesting fellow. He's from Bloomington, 100 miles from Chicago. That's not a big black population, but he's lived in Chicago about 7 or 8 years. So he's biracial. One of his parents is black, one of his parents is white, and they live in Atlanta. They live in Atlanta, right? So there's just so many interesting people that were on the call, but I liked it. I think you did a great job. I think the presentation was kind of the focus that brought people together, and I think the way that people were willing to ask questions and get on the camera, I think went as well as I thought, and maybe even slightly better. Just like people seemed a little bit passionate. I appreciated the sister who said, "Hey, with all due respect, I think blacks are worse off, and we should focus on blacks." That's the kind of honesty we need, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure she would get an argument from me.
Mm-hmm.
I've been called, like, by Latino community, sort of a traitor, and you care more about black folks than Latinos. A lot of folks, some of our own members tell me that. But I wear it proudly. I'm like, I think my analysis is better than yours. And if you can show me how ignoring black folks helps even one Latino, maybe I'll think of switching.
Mm-hmm.
But until you come up with some sort of scheme, I know that it's in my interest and my kids' interest and my wife's interest to make sure that Benita's doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like, I'm smart, right? And we need to all support each other. And, in a different atmosphere, like a small group, I think we could have talked with her more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was hoping that my slides that talked about the civil rights cases that predated the civil rights movement helped lay the foundation of how we've built off of one another and we've gained strength together. And then once we're together, we can expand the rights to other groups that are marginalized. But yeah, I mean, I think we could only skim, I wouldn't say I skim, but we can only hit high points across a lot of different areas. But there's enough there for people to dig deeper and pull cases and look at other joint efforts happening or that had happened across the country. The next session I'm excited about because, as you saw in my synopsis, my summary is in terms of building political power is how we're going to get ahead. So, okay.
I like it. Hey, one question.
Mm-hmm.
Can we, maybe it's already been done, but can we save the chats?
Asia just did that and sent it to me.
Excellent. Because can you send me that? Because even tomorrow morning,